Welcome to the Rabbit Hole podcast.
Down the rabbit hole we go.
Welcome to the Rabbit Hole with your hosts Marty and Andy.
We begin in
5, 4, 3, 2.
Today we have a very special guest with us. We've been talking a lot about mold in our situation and everything that we've been through in our house. And we're happy to have Bethany Uribe here. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
And she is a specialist with Restoration LLC, and they are in Arizona. But she is going to help us out today to kind of understand the ins and outs of mold and why it's important to mitigate and remediate if you have water damage in your home. So without further ado, I'm going to let you just kind of give us a rundown of who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. So again, my name is Bethany. I started in this industry back when I was 18. 26 now, so I've had a lot of time through trying to figure out, rights and wrongs of this industry. Now I run our entire mitigation, remediation division. I definitely see a lot of misconceptions about what we're going to talk about today, so I'm actually really excited to get into it.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't even know that there was a difference between mitigation and remediation when we had our flood in our home. So can you kind of give us a little idea of what the difference is?
So the biggest difference, to make it simple and easy, is mitigation has to deal with water. So if you have a flood, a backup, a roof leak, mitigation deals with water. Remediation is mold. So if you have any sort of fungi, mold, those types of things, you want to make sure that you are remediating that, but you want to mitigate the water.
Okay. All right. So it's kind of like stopping the bleed.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Good. Because, that's kind of what happened to us. And I don't know, you could see some of the pictures. We had all sorts of damage, but we had to have a whole dumpster wagon. We started with just a few drips of water. And then by the end of the night, we ended up with gallons and buckets just coming out of the ductwork. So it was kind of a big deal to find a leak and then end up with your ceiling totally soaked and waterlogged, and then having to call in for help. And our insurance actually directed us to mitigation and remediation. So it's kind of cool that you guys work with homeowners insurance to try and protect the structure and to get everything back on the right track. So
yeah, if we're getting into remediation, it means that it's probably something it could have been sitting for a while, or maybe the mitigation didn't happen, on time or the way it should have. And that's when your homeowner's insurance kind of gets mad at you sometimes. It's the way policies are written, and it can be kind of a pain. So we always want to make sure that we stop the bleeding and know that mitigation is your first line of defense. If you can get something taken care of right away when you notice it, it's better for everybody.
Right. Now, that's kind of funny that you mentioned the timeline. How soon do you have to attend to a water leak?
So statistically, under perfect conditions, and those are the key words, is under perfect conditions, fungi can start growing within 48 to 72 hours. So as soon as water is introduced to bacteria, this whole process starts. The back of drywall, perfect place to happen, right? There's not a whole lot of airflow. It can be stuffy and muggy, and it has a perfect place to have water, 1, and bacteria for 2. So that is what that process starts and needs to grow into a bigger problem. So you want to try to mitigate as soon as you can.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we had much choice because our ceiling started to kind of collapse in on itself. So we definitely had to get someone involved. But I think the scariest part was that it was going on for so long without us being able to even see the mold or know that there was a water leak. So by the time it came through the ceiling. It was kind of this 1-2 punch of, you have all of this water, because with us, it basically started in our HVAC system, and it was dripping into the duct lines. So when those, the accordion fiber duct lines, when that popped, it was dripping into all of the insulation and behind the walls, but we didn't really know it. And we basically called our insurance, we called our builder, we tried to get help. And our insurance said, if you don't get it all cleared out in 24 to 48 hours, there's going to be a bigger problem. So they jumped on it. But it was that shock of knowing, not only do I have a leak, but now I have this health issue that I have to kind of contend with. And I don't know what kind of stories you've heard in your line of work. I know that we were pretty sick, but what kinds of things can mold do?
It's it can be very toxic. Some people can't, like, their bodies cannot cleanse the toxics that mold has. So there are some people that can't be around absolutely any. And there are some people that can be around the highest of spore counts and be totally fine. So it can give you symptoms that are just like a common cold. So it goes down to like, okay, I'm in my own space. I don't know that anything's happening. I don't know that there's a water loss, but I continuously have a cold, a runny nose. I might have a fever 1 week because maybe I spent more time in a room that has a higher count than others. And that is probably the scariest part about it, is that unless you go and get tested for like mold spores in your blood, like you have to get blood work done, then you really don't know. And I think that is honestly the scariest part.
Yeah. I know with us, we had, our youngest daughter's basically growing up in an environment where we've always had mold exposure. And she has some heart conditions and other things. So it's like you're constantly having to mitigate any little, we can't even have a normal leak, like you can't even leave a towel on the floor for too long because she'll react to anything that gets activated. So it's kind of hard to choose between different types of, I guess, remediation. What does your company recommend?
So with remediation, depends on the material type. So honestly, I automatically recommend anything that is affected that isn't part of like making it structurally sound, remove it. I know that some people are like, oh, I see some surface mold on the front of my drywall. Okay, but can you really tell me that that's just surface stuff? Because I don't know about you, but I can't see through walls. So, you know what I mean? So most people say, they're like, oh, that water damage happened 2 years ago. It's not a big deal. I automatically, in the way that even IH or industrial hygienists do their reports, is they go around the home and do a thorough inspection for any water damage that is seen, any visible water damage, whether it happened last week or last year. The automatic recommendation is to have it removed because of the processes that can start. So we recommend to remove it. And then if it is on the structure itself, we put up the big containment, we use negative air. So we use like industrial air purifiers is technically the best way to explain what it is. And we go through a full remediation process of removing the affected materials, sanding, wire brushing, spraying with like a peroxide-based antimicrobial to make sure that we're really cleaning not only the structure, removing the affected materials, and cleaning the air itself inside the containment before we tear it all down and, let it roam with the rest of the home.
Yeah. I know in our case, it got to the point where one company was telling us to basically throw everything away. Just get rid of everything and start from scratch. And then we had another company that was able to use micro mist to clean everything. And we did testing before and after to make sure that we got everything. And they seemed to do a really good job because it came up perfectly clean. But I don't know if you can see here, but these were our numbers when we started.
Yeah.
And that was not... what I always say this word, I say stachybotrys, but I don't think I'm saying it right. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right, good. So, yeah, that was the one that scared us because that's what everyone refers to as the toxic black mold, even though
Right.
all mold is toxic, right? But yeah, so we had that, and this number was the first time that we tested, and what we didn't realize was we had a bedroom that had a leak prior to our whole HVAC scenario, and once we saw this, we went ahead and tested that, and that's when we saw this number here on the screen.
Oh,
So
wow.
that room was actually much worse from a leak prior that was unrelated to the HVAC. And we had no idea, but my daughter was sick all the time, just all the time. And I don't know how severe a mold count needs to be before it starts to scare people. But I think if you're affected by it, you're going to know almost right away.
Yeah, no, definitely. Spore counts, they can say a lot, but also can be misleading, right? Because if you go to your outdoor count, you can see kind of the difference. So raw count for outside, you're at 2, inside, you're at 22. Results in the spores within those are the 27 and the 290. So we know that there are some that are outside, right? No matter where you go, the time of day, if you tested this right now, outside would be a totally different count than what it is on this piece of paper. So that's why we do our baseline, is what this air sample is. So we always do a baseline because we want to know what is native to the area right now as we are taking these other samples. So that's what the baseline is used for. The inside, it really does depend. Obviously, with touch bot trees, we really don't want any, right? Like that would be perfect, golden, we're good, is that there is no black toxic mold in your home. I mean, it would just make everybody a little bit safer, you know, a little peace of mind. So you don't need a very high spore count for that to affect somebody, especially somebody that it sounds like your daughter that's has a little bit more immune compromise. You know, because other people could probably sit in this room and be fine for a little while before it starts to affect them. But it, like I said earlier, it just really affects everybody differently. As far as you were talking about with like your furniture and stuff and getting rid of everything, yeah, I mean, it can go both ways. Some people believe that you can clean everything and anything and it'll be okay. Some people believe that like your couch cushions, you're never going to fully know if you have penetrated all the way through and cleaned everything. I think fogging or like the micro mist that you talked about is a great way to kind of just get a registered EPA disinfectant through your house and stop any sort of process that is forming without you really knowing if it's there or not. So it really is one of those things where that's probably why you're going to get a few companies that, you know, give you one or the other. And at the end of the day, it's trying to give you all the information to make sure that you're informed as much as you can be to make the decision that you need.
And it's so hard because sometimes you just don't have the budget and insurance companies cut you off at a certain point.
Yeah.
You know, so you've really got to stay on top of your leaks. I even saw some products where you can attach them to your piping. So if there's, you know, something leaking, it'll change the pressure and you'll be able to know and detect a leak quicker. So you might even want to do stuff like that if you're building new. It's worth the investment because once you have a leak, this is life-changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always, on older homes or anything that you can like put something next to it, there's these little devices where like if something starts to leak or you have like a flood, it makes an ear-piercing noise to warn you that there's water coming where water shouldn't be. I saw it a lot back when I first got into this industry around a lot of plumbers. A lot of plumbers would set them by like water heaters or underneath sinks by RO systems. And it just lets you know if even, I think it's like even less than a quarter of an inch, like if there is water there, you're going to know because it is an ear piercing noise, but it's helpful.
Yeah, I would have loved to have known instead of having like a year of collection happening, you know.
Yeah.
That was not a good feeling when we found that out. Artie, did you want to?
Yeah, yeah. So, Bethany, you said you were 26.
Yeah, I'm 26
Okay.
now.
All right. So I'm just thinking of how the community here would take that. If I'm going to bring up a situation. So before our ceiling collapsed and the real, the tipping point of our whole situation, we had that situation on the first floor with the mold, and the builder brought their mold expert in. And the only way I can say this out loud, because I'm sure they would, maybe they would deny it, but we had a third party inspector come as witness to everything that was happening. And he declared that if you can't see mold, it doesn't exist. Now, he was in his early 50s, and I could see them say, hey, you're only 26. You've only been in the industry 8 years. If you can't see mold, we all know it doesn't really exist. How do you dispute that?
I mean, I think the lab results kind of speak for themselves, to be honest with you. I even when I get calls today, it's can you see it? Well, no. Okay, well then automatically I'm going to recommend you to get some air testing, because it does still come down to those things where if like you can't see it, I can't see it, but lab results, they're all there. Unless you're testing rooms like when people want to test like their garage, like that's a very hard room to test because it is open to your it's open to outside. So if we're testing a garage, we recommend it be airtight for at least 48 hours to see if there's something that we can come up with. But for the most part, I think that's completely wrong. I told Andy about this story a little bit when we chatted the first time, but when I first got into this industry, we had this client that swore up and down that she had some sort of mold in her bathroom. Swore up and down. Wasn't there. We couldn't see it. Even the test didn't come back positive. And we were like, she was like, nope, it's there. And we're like, okay, what can we do to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and also making sure that we're taking care of like your concerns? So I'm like, okay, let's cut a hole. So we cut a hole in the wall, and sure enough, as it sat dormant in her entire bathroom, was completely covered in mold. We had to do a contact swab sample on the back of the drywall for the report to even come back as positive, because there hadn't been active water there for a while and it just sat dormant, but it was still affecting her health. And that's a story to this day that when people are like, do you think I'm being over dramatic? No, I don't. Like, you know your body better than anybody. You live in this space. Nobody else is here as much as you are. And if it's affecting you, then we need to figure out what we can do to help or do something with it.
It's funny you say that, because so I was working from home all of COVID, and like obviously a lot of people, and I was working in this one space, and then my wife wanted me to work in what was officially our office, and I hadn't been. And so when I changed and started working in that space, within a short amount of time, I noticed that I was like incredibly fatigued. Like I don't even know how to describe how tired I was, to the point where after working for a few hours, I could get to the point where my speech was like impaired a little bit. Like I would mumble from like a sense of exhaustion. And then I was really depressed, like in this weird kind of way. I remember sitting down in our bedroom talking, and I said, I just don't like this whole thing where I'm like, I just don't look forward to anything. I don't care what happens. This whole like speech of like, there is no hope and I don't care. And once I took myself out of that space and had a little bit of time to not be exposed, I didn't know what we found this all out after the fact. But once I was out of that space, I don't want to say I snapped out of it, but within a short amount of time, I did. I kind of like went back to myself. I wasn't completely exhausted, and there was no signs. And I'm somebody from the Northeast where I think when we think about mold in places where it gets very cold, I'm not to say it doesn't, I'm sure it happens, but I don't think it's maybe as dangerous as when you're in a warm climate. And so you have experiences where people were just depressed, fatigued, and it went away within a short order from mold sickness. Have you seen that?
Most of the time here in Arizona, it's really weird because I've actually seen more growth here than my time in Washington, where I'm originally from. So, and it's that same common misconception with everybody that I talk to is it's hot, it'll take care of itself. So most people let it go, and then they start having those neurological effects that you're talking about, like impairments and memory loss, confusion, you can migraines, headaches, and then start getting the symptoms of like just normal cold symptoms, flu. But having people step out of their space and realize, maybe it is my home. Maybe it is my office. And that's when we get into like sick building syndrome and stuff like that. It's like, maybe it is the area that I'm in. It really takes time for people to step out and be like, okay, maybe it was this or maybe it was that. But most of the time, by the time that happens, I'm already gone or out, or they're not sure what they're going to do. And so I haven't seen a whole lot of people give me a lot of feedback, after we've come into the work or after they've been out of the space. But I do know that we do have those misconceptions in different places of the world anywhere, just because of temperature or where they're at, or we don't get a lot of rain here, or, people have those common misconceptions a lot.
And mold is kind of a survivor, just the fact that it can lie dormant and wait for moisture. Like you can have moisture in the air, you can have moisture from a leak. It could be an extra humid day. You just don't know what's going to reactivate the molds. And that's kind of scary too. So
yeah, no, it is. I mean, it comes back to what can you do to prevent it, but you can't prevent everything, right? Like you can't prevent like your kid not turning on the fan in your bathroom and just took a 40-minute steaming hot shower and you're hoping that it's going to be okay afterwards. If the sprinkler is hitting the side of the house and you had a crack in like your stucco or your foundation, like this is all stuff that you don't know until you can see it or feel it or test for it. Like these are just things that you try to control the best you can, but you can't prevent everything.
And what about things like, I know everyone's like, just spray it down with bleach. Can we talk a little bit about bleach and why that's not a good idea?
Oh man, yes, bleach doesn't do anything. That is the biggest thing about this industry, and the biggest things about hearing from homeowners is like, oh, I did a DIY, I did it myself, and I just sprayed it down with bleach. I'm like, I know, and I love bleach, and I know it kills a lot of things, but this is not one of them.
Right.
If you really want to try to do it yourself, go to Home Depot. Get a actual mold and mildew spray. Anything that tells you it's an antimicrobial or a registered EPA disinfectant. They even have a really good one called Benefect. It's something that I've even used for like my apartments or homes. It's try to do a little bit more research than just the first thing that you see on Google of spray it with bleach and wipe it down and you'll be good.
Right. Or like, it does not work that way. And the other thing that I learned too was like this whole, because when the Stacky Botrytis, whatever, when that came out, this idea that it was toxic black mold, but really it's almost like a construction mold because it loves construction materials. So I think I didn't realize and recognize that we're basically battling something that wants to eat your house. That's the perfect meal.
Yeah, because you want to destroy the living organism that mold is, because that's part of it, right? Is that this is a living thing, whether it's growing a mushroom or just black on the walls. It's still a living organism that you have to kill with certain types of biocides and substances to be able to actually work. And like bleach and bleach, chlorine, that's just not what it is. So we want to make sure that we're killing the organism instead of just wiping it away.
Right. Yeah. And
I'm
what
curious. I'm
about, oh, go
sorry.
ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, like, at what point? Because I think what's happening we're in Virginia, and what's happening here is not every county, but our county, Chesterfield County. It seems like the standards are going to facilitate mold, especially in new construction. Because if Andrea explained it better than me, but basically taking a tube of conditioned air, exposing it to the outdoors, and then bringing it back into the house, basically an unconditioned space. So if that's the case, if let's say mold is as dangerous as it is, and the building community is and regulatory community is doing what they're doing, at what point does it become a issue for, or maybe it doesn't, but at what point may it become an issue for the health department?
You mean taking like the HVAC ducts outside of the conditioned space into like
Correct.
unconditioned space and then
Yeah.
creating a condensation issue?
Yeah. Because I can tell you what's happening in their facility. It's not this happened and it's terrible. Policies and practices are facilitating it. And like in my case, I would have probably just avoided that space or I would have just gone on with the effects, because it's not like a broken arm or a broken leg or it's something that's obvious. It's a slow roll poisoning, really. So I wouldn't have known about it. So at what point does this become a health? That's what I'm curious about. Is this something that's crossing over into a health department scenario? Have you had experiences where health inspectors have come in and said, what you're doing is causing harm? It has to change, when let's say the building community is not of that opinion?
That is a great question. Honestly, the hard part about my job is finding those fine lines, because anything in new construction, they're not really, I don't want to say they're not worried. That might be the wrong word, but their inspections are based off of different things, right? Like new construction compared to like if you're going to sell and you have to get your house inspected, those are two very different things. When it becomes a health issue, I don't think they run on the same wavelength, to be honest with you. I mean, we have to do things that are set to the IICRC industry standard. That is like our golden book of rules. And I know we talk a lot about like air quality and mold and how things are connected in certain ways, but I think that they leave mold to such it can't be broken down quite to an exact science yet. So I'm not sure how many rules I could put on it, I guess is the best way to put it, because at the end of the day, it's not an exact science.
But that air testing you were talking about, though, that would be, to me, that's kind of a valid proof. No?
Yes. So the air test, yes, that is a science. You can tell me that there are spores in the air, but the growing form and like how it grows is not the exact science. So I can tell you if it's there from an air test, but how it came to be, was it part of this leak? Was it part of something else? Could this have been something that happened a year ago and it said dormant? That is the part that I think even right now we have a hard time in the industry with. When did it happen? Was it part of this leak? Because that's what insurance companies ask us all the time, right? Was this damage part of this leak? Well, I mean, it's in the same area, sure. But there's no exact science behind that.
Yeah.
And
so
that,
I get it. There's the gray areas. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I don't know how it would come to. I haven't had a whole lot with the health division being like, this is going to be part of it. The only real thing that I can think of is overall air quality, and what I talked about earlier is SBS. So SBS is sick building syndrome, to where like exactly what you experienced. You went into your office, or like say me going into mine, and I am sick in that building. What is causing me to be sick in that building? And that's where I know a lot of health and industrial hygienists get brought in, but there's so much gray area with mold, and hopefully at some point there will not be as much, but there's just no exact science at this point.
Yeah. And it's almost like the different industries kind of need to get together on it. You need the health department to talk to mitigation specialists, to talk to HVAC installers and builders, so that everyone's on the same page. Because it's almost like the more airtight houses get, the more conditioned they become, the more we create these opportunities for mold to kind of infest our homes. And that's really scary. Like, I don't know if you can see the picture, because I know we're having some technical difficulties, but this is inside of our air conditioner unit, like the air, what do they call it? The return. And this is the water line that was in our HVAC system, and we had no idea. So it was just full of water all through the duct. The construction dust was inside of that. That allowed for mold to happen, but did it start at the HVAC system? Well, I don't know, because we had a leak prior to the HVAC being operational in a different bedroom. So could it have grown in that bedroom and then just lived in the air duct system as the air circulates? I mean, it could go anywhere. How do you pinpoint the origin when you have a leaky house? You know?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, honestly. When we do an overall like home air quality sample, you know, the company that we work with, they recommend one air sample every 300 square feet. But there's always a but, right? There's always something else. If you want to pinpoint that even more, if you have, right, like open concept is huge nowadays. So if you have 3,300 square feet, of open airspace, how much are you really going to be able to pinpoint that? So if overall air quality is the real bottom line, I recommend to do every room. And then that'll pinpoint us even more. And then from every room you go to, say, your bedroom has the one that's the highest spore count. Okay, start in there. Right. Where can you start? Windows, attic spaces. Is there anything on your roof that penetrates right above that specific room? You know, so it's kind of like a scavenger hunt, but with hints. So you start with one room. Can anything in this room cause this, or could have caused this, even before it was repaired? Maybe you put on a new roof, but you didn't really look in the attic. So that's kind of the best way to figure out the origin point. You know, is it in the ceiling? Maybe it's you find some stuff on your carpet, so maybe it's more of a slab leak. Like, you have to play hide and seek with these leaks and really try to go to every possibility that could have happened in the past or is happening right now.
Right. Now, what do you say about things like carpets? Salvageable or rip them out and toss them?
That's a tough one.
Hard question.
It is, honestly, because I put myself in homeowner shoes, and I don't think everybody in my industry does. So I think if this was my home, I have 2 young kids, would I want my kids in there? No, I would want it removed.
Great.
I don't care if it's the size of my hand and you have to replace the whole bedroom. Like, right. I want it out of there, because we go back to the exact science thing of, you can't tell me that it hasn't traveled farther and you just can't see it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So putting myself in the situation of homeowners, I would remove it. It has been affected. It is a organic material where living organisms can live. Remove it.
Right. Yeah.
I just got had to get a car inspection, and I've got a pretty new vehicle. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, a lot of these problems that happen with homes, you kind of inherit acquire these problems. I mean, we built a new home to avoid problems, and then we've had more problems with our new home than all of our homes combined. But that's for lots of reasons. But it makes me think that an effective tact would be to annually, or at least every other year, to have a plan to have your air tested. And for sure, when it comes to buying a home, before you buy that home, have that air tested. Because I can tell you, like, we've had varying degrees of intensity related to health problems. And at least if you could have that air quality test and you could know, don't just think it's no big deal. Like I said, coming from the Northeast, it gets very cold. I don't think we have the same, I know we don't have the same level of mold as a place like Richmond or Central Virginia. It's hot. It's humid. It's going to be 100 degrees today, very muggy. This is like I won't say perfect, you're the expert, but it seems like a really great place for mold to develop and hang out. So you have to be extra vigilant. And our experience with regulatory bodies is kind of, hear no evil, see no evil. And so they're not going to look into this. And if you think somebody's watching this problem and actually going, hey, this is a health situation, this is going to hurt people financially, they're not. You've got to be proactive about it. And I don't remember, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you charge for air quality, but Andrea, I don't know if we spent like one of the times $300-400. We did it a few times.
Per sample. I think we ended up spending, a couple grand to get our whole house tested several rounds because we had to make sure that But
that was unfair. That was in a crisis situation. If you were just coming in to just kind of do a check, just a test and generically kind of like, just as a
per room air quality test.
Just something that would be like a proactive check to just say, should I buy this house? Is there a mold problem I'm going to walk into? I haven't really heard of anybody. I've heard of inspections, but I don't know that that's a staple part of the inspection. It's usually structural if it's done, but not an air quality test.
Well, they test for radon, so you could probably just request an air quality test with your inspection, and it's worth it.
I would do that. Yeah, I would absolutely, if I was going to, well, I will be buying another property that's already established, absolutely have it tested because, like I said earlier, our builder brought over his mold expert and he said, if you don't see it, then it doesn't exist. That's not reality. That's not how it works. But, don't buy the dream, test it, before you jump in and you just kind of think it'll all work out. It may. Right. But depending on your climate, it may not. And once you bought it, you own it, problems and all. So before you cross that line, I think it's very wise to have that test done. Very wise.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. 100%, because I've seen both sides. I have seen the people that, hey, I need you to test my house before I sell it. And then I've also been on the side of, hey, I need you to test this before I buy it. I've seen both. And it's funny because it really lets you take a look at just people and how they are, right? Because some people will get their results back and they're like, hey, I'm going to sell it. I'm like, okay, you do have an elevated spore count. Okay, well, I'm going to disclose it and then it's their problem. I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, I'm glad that you got an air quality test done. I'm glad that you're going to disclose it. But I don't think that people always know what they're signing up for.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can tell you they don't. Our remediation estimate was 6 figures. Like, it was intense, the initial one. And then we ended up having to work with a couple different companies to try and get it down because it was intense. I mean, it's not a small cleanup.
No, not at all. Because, you got to think of it as, for our industry, we treat it as if it is hazardous material. So you're in full PPE, you're going into clean rooms, you have to, like, if you're doing the full thing, you're having your furniture packed out, your whole life packed up and cleaned. You're having your whole entire house, under negative air pressure and then positive air pressure, and trying to get your air cleaned and getting your ducts cleaned and making sure that every surface is wiped, horizontal, vertical wiping of literally everything. depending on the size of the house, you're right, it is expensive. And the part that I always stress to homeowners is how their policy is written. If your policy does not have any sort of fungi coverage, and the only way that it is ever going to be covered is through mitigation, then you better hope that you catch that leak every time. And you better hope that your policy is written in a way that if it is an unbeknown leak to you, then good, you're going to be covered. But if you don't have it written that way, if they can prove that that leak was long-term, you could be in trouble.
Yeah.
I feel like when people buy new houses, they're going through the motions, right? Like especially first-time home buyers, I'm going through the motions. I know I need home insurance. There's a lot of expenses that are coming out right now. Let me just find a homeowner's insurance and let's sign with it. But you don't know what you're signing for. And I think that is the biggest thing, is look at your policy.
Yeah, and I know we found out really quickly that if there's some sort of workmanship issue, they have an exit clause, so insurance may not cover it, and they might have a mold exclusion. So you need to have a very specific conversation about mold. If it comes from a leak, if the leak was existing, if it wasn't. I mean, it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah,
and
no, I 100% agree.
And like you can see, I put it on here, like they were covered head to toe. That guy had a thing that covered his whole head. I didn't want to show his face, but like, I mean, you're talking head to toe, gloves, rubber boots, and they're ripping it off when they get out to try and not contaminate their car and their other space. It's scary. You know, this stuff doesn't just go away.
Yeah, because you got to think, right? Okay, what is he probably wearing underneath that PPE? We're wearing clothes that have fibers that spores can connect to, and they can live there, you know? So I remember when I was actually in the field and we would do like asbestos jobs or mold jobs like this, is like you're coming home and you're immediately like, these clothes go into a separate bin. They go into, if like your laundry is in the garage or something, like they stay in the garage until they're being cleaned, because it's always that what if possibility of, did I at some point, could I have cross-contaminated myself, which then could affect my family? So it's like a sneaky little organism that's just there.
Yeah, it's like having a bomb go off in your house, you know, and now you're like radioactive almost. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you know, but you know it's there. Now everything's affected. So it's wild. It really is.
Well, in our case, I have a question. And so in our case, you know, between legal costs and repairs so far in our new home construction debacle, we're roughly $250,000 out of pocket so far. On the horizon, we've probably got between, you know, repairs and legal costs, we're probably looking at another $250,000-300,000. You know, that's brutal. Like, I don't want to, it's brutal. I guess my question to you is, one of the things that in our state has been pushed most recently, and I'm going to disclose, up till very recently, I've been a lifelong Republican voter. Okay. Full disclosure, I have bias, right? But our Republican administration really pushed the cutting of regulations. So a lot of the things that are happening, it's kind of this gray area where there's not really a standard of accountability. You kind of got to be able to come out of pocket if you run into these problems pretty heavily. So from your worldview experience, is there some simple ways that you could, through some very minimal basic regulation, require new construction and even contractors of certain size to follow some required guidelines and be held accountable to significantly minimize the mold problem proactively?
I mean, I definitely wish there was, right? Because what we can kind of compare this to is asbestos, right? We have federal regulations, we have state regulations, we have county regulations. So why isn't that something that we're not doing to mold? Right? So when it comes to new construction, a big thing is Okay, put the roof on as fast as you can. All right, that's normally the big thing, because if it rains, all of that wood is organic material that's going to get wet. So how that would be the biggest how to fix, right? Like, we have to build houses, we have to keep pushing in the construction world, but how can we make it to where an entire house is going to go up and is going to be protected in the amount of time to where it can't get rained on, it's not going to get snowed on, it couldn't have the possibility of doing certain things. And honestly, the only thing that I can really think of that would help tremendously is like an encapsulant. So if you build a house, you get the roof on, you get all the outside stuff on, you know, the sheathing, and you are left with studs. At that point, if we could work together to get to a point to where it would have to be encapsulated, treated and encapsulated before you could put any other materials in there, I think even just that jump would make a world of difference, right? You would already be spraying it with an antimicrobial, and you would be encapsulating anything that could possibly be there to where it wouldn't spread anywhere else.
So
Yeah.
so let's
It's like one
say that.
added step of taking the time before you put on the food, the drywall,
Yeah.
just to encapsulate the whole building and spray it and make sure that we've taken care of anything that might have gotten wet before we feed it. You know, it seems like
Essentially, yeah.
common sense to me. You know, one more step. I mean, if you do it when the walls are not up, I can't imagine it's going to be as expensive because everything is exposed. So if you did it at that point, it would be easy to get to, less expensive, preventative, and I would deem it almost like a selling point.
Well, I have a question about it. So, like, I've observed in our neighborhood that, because it was a lot of new construction, and there'd be pallets of wood just fully exposed, being rained on for days.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see other structures where there wasn't really a roof over top protecting, just rained on for days, exposed lumber. Pretty much, I want to say every time, but almost every time, varying degrees. What would be, so you say, well, okay, the cost of that is going to be a factor, because it is. If, let's say, I've got and you can use your area, whatever you're familiar with, but if I got a 3,000 square foot house, new construction, to do what you suggested there, what's a ballpark cost of something like that to make that happen?
So that, let's see, I just did an encapsulant on a house, but it was for like a smoke and odor. So it's the same type of process. It's just a different encapsulant. And to be honest, it was about 3,000 square feet, and it cost, well, that's the tricky question. What we charged insurance to do it was close to about $5,000. But, you know, full disclosure of how much it actually costs is not that much.
So if you had scale, and because I think that's the other thing too, is like,
yeah, if you had repeat customers, you could probably make a deal with builders and make it cheaper because you're doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah, because it runs through like a regular paint sprayer. So like, think about somebody spraying the inside of your house like if they're painting it. That's pretty much what it is. So you run disinfectant through one. You can actually use a fogging system that sprays the disinfectant, and then the paint sprayer for like the encapsulant. So you can get like a 5-gallon bucket of an encapsulant for, I don't know, $150. So how far is that encapsulant going to go? You know, like, how big is the house? Are you doing the attic? Are you not going to do the attic because it's technically non-livable space? Like, there would still be some gray areas, and that's kind of the hardest part about it. But overhead costs, like I said, you're probably looking at like close to $5,000. But if you have repeat customers and you can buy everything in bulk and it's what we do every day, then you're probably going to drop that down quite a bit.
Right.
So you're talking about like 0.5% to 1% of the cost of the home. And let's say that we did that. Let's say we followed some best practices, like not having exposed pallets of wood. We at least covered them. And we did the treatment that you're talking about. What kind of and this is not an official thing, but like what kind of cut does that look like on a, what does that do to your odds? Does it give you a 50% better chance of not having a problem? 70? What's it look like?
I mean, so I would, like I said, I'd still recommend doing it after everything is kind of put up so that you don't have that possibility of exposure again. You know, like if you're just going to spray a palette and then sit it on the curb for another 3 weeks until you get to it, you're probably not going to have a very high percentage. But I mean, we put houses back together and we expect them to be good for, I mean, my own company gives anywhere from a 2 to 5 year warranty. So when you're coming in new construction and you're thinking about like the nightmare that you guys are dealing with right now, you know, would you have paid, let's just throw $5,000 out there. Would you have paid an additional $5,000 for your house to be like, you know what? There is a possibility that you guys used lumber that was compromised. We're going to spray it and we're going to encapsulate it. And it might have helped a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we literally have a pest contract that was, I mean, preventative, and I think that was $1,200 added to the line items. I would absolutely pay $5,000. That's like a granite upgrade in the houses. Like honestly,
Yeah,
I'd much rather take a lesser grade granite and know that my kids are breathing clean air than risk what we've been through. And it does kind of give you a little bit of almost like a preventative too, right? Once you spray, it helps to like keep things okay for a short period of time. So,
well, I think about it like we require people to wear a seatbelt. Why do we do that? Well, for their safety, but also what? If they have a horrible accident, then it taxes the system because they didn't wear a seatbelt. So you look at these houses and you say, well, it's not just the individual. You're taxing the system financially. You're taxing the system when there's a catastrophe, and health-wise, you're taxing the system by not having this one extra step that on a mortgage, $5,000 over 30 years is going to be, you know, a cup of coffee a month or something. It's not going to be a lot of money as long as it's done correctly. And it would be more for new construction.
yeah.
So.
Yeah. And like, I'm always the bad guy on this side, right? Because new construction is like, okay, we're putting them up as fast as we can because we are low on housing, which I get. But at what point do we put people's health also in that mix? Like you guys are saying, like, what if we could have did a in-depth HVAC inspection before we closed everything up, you know?
Right.
There's just things that I wish that we would take the extra step to make it healthy from the beginning.
Right. And that would also save us on housing too, because we wouldn't have to throw away buildings if we maintained and kept them going. You know, you rehab what you have and build new, and you end up in a better place, I think. So,
well, that's the thing. So there's like, and I look at this from the other side where they say, well, it's too expensive, then we won't be able to. Okay, two things. One, to her point, you're gonna conserve more properties longer. That's going to be a big help to housing. Two, from an economic development standpoint, we're now in a position where we're kind of just having to carry this burden. And we've been fortunate, but we've worked really, really hard for a long time. At this point, we would probably be planning on buying a lake house or some second property in the not too distant future that we can't do now because we bought a new house and we're going to have to spend just as much as we paid for the house to fix it and cover attorneys. So that's not an option. So the economic development from that purchase goes away into oblivion. Nobody gains from it. And then secondly, to her point, is like, is this going to be a structure that I think is going to stand the test of time? You know, and especially, and we were built in 2020. If you look at houses that are being built now, it's not gotten better. It's a lot of times gotten worse.
That's the other question that I had for you, Bethany, before we let you go, because I know we're running long, so I don't want to keep you over the hour. But did you notice an increase in issues during COVID because of looser regulation?
So I think the only real reason that we saw an increase of issues, I don't know if we can blame it on regulation. I'm sure that there's part of it, but also the fact that everybody was home. You know, you're using things 100% more than what you normally would. You're not spending 8 to 12 hours in a different building, you're spending all of your time in your home. There was more backups, there was more leaks, there was more accidents of, hey, my kids left the tub on and it flooded my
Oh,
house.
got ya, got ya.
So
That's interesting. Yeah.
there was so much more use in the homes where I don't know if you can put regulation onto that, because you still had to go through inspections for new builds. They had different, 6 feet was a little bit different because you were working outside. So I don't know if you can blame so much on regulation. I think I saw more of an up in just people being home more than anything,
Right.
to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So, but yeah, I think we covered so much ground today. I think it's fascinating. I could talk about this for hours, but I know that you have a job to do and other people to help. So we want to take the time to thank you for helping us and kind of making it clearer. And maybe we'll have to have you back because there's just so much more.
There is. Honestly, I am with you. People are like, you're 26, you're female, what are you doing? And I was like, man, there's just, this industry is so fascinating. And like, I wish that people would be excited about it. And like, I know in your guys' mind, you're like, this is not exciting. I don't want to be a part of this. But it would be so much better if people were educated about it, And I think that's where I come in, is I've always wanted to help people, but I didn't know how until I found this space. And I just wish people would take this education and be like, okay, there is more to it than just a black spot on my ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we can help each other with knowledge to prevent it from happening. So, I really appreciate it. I know that this has been fun for me, and I'll definitely have you back on again if you're willing, if we weren't too bad. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. You guys are great. I think what you guys are doing is awesome because, like I said, education is a big thing. And doing podcasts and the way that like you can reach people nowadays, this is great. This was so exciting for me.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you want to leave with our audience before you go, or?
I think Marty is absolutely right. Get your new house tested.
Yes, for sure.
Those were wise words. I see a lot of really smart stuff, like a lot. So thank you for noticing that. I appreciate that. But as far as I guess we'll leave it on this. Our thought is problems happen, people break the law, jobs go sideways. But if we can warn people and make them aware, I think the most effective vote you can cast is vote with your feet, and that might just be avoiding a transaction because it's not clean, it's not clear, and you're at risk. So if we can just help people avoid that, losing those checks, losing those deals, that's going to be how you get people's attention.
Yeah, get it tested.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But if you want to point out a website or anything that we can follow you on, that would be great.
Man, I wish I had a website or something. I feel like, I think you guys spoke with Al. He's our marketing guy. I feel like at this point I need a website. He's got me in everything. So honestly, I mean, it really just comes to make sure I will stress, look at your policies, get tested if you're feeling weird, get your air tested. And maybe now I need a website.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll talk after, for sure. I got some hints for you. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it all. And hopefully we'll have you back again on another episode and we'll talk about some more mold stuff.
Sounds great, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.